Right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got lots to talk about today. So let's actually start off with the first news story and make our way through it. The first is actually around the Expropriation Without Compensation Act. This is the idea that obviously the government would be able to expropriate property without paying any form of compensation where the public interest. Now, obviously, the act is just being signed by Cyril Ramaphosa. Apparently, this all occurred without the knowledge of the GNU parties. And a lot of the GNU parties took the president to task, including the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. Now, why this becomes interesting is now that Donald Trump has weighed in and basically talked about the horrendousness of the South African political landscape, all of a sudden the DA is jumping in to defend the president. This is obviously on the back that the news is that trade with the United States could be damaged. And obviously this is having a detrimental impact on the rand. Now, why is this important? Because the DA is now saying that the land doesn't do expropriation without compensation. There's no land grabs, there's no confiscation of land. Dean McPherson says he will never allow it to occur on his watch. Even though I did videos like 2 weeks ago, they were trying to get rid of Dean because he wasn't supporting EWC, and he was now going to be in breach of his office. His own deputies were running smear campaigns against him. So why is it that the DA suddenly have closed ranks around the president, are supporting him, and says EWC is no longer a problem? So if the Expropriation Act is no longer a problem, the DA now support it? Yeah, this doesn't make sense. I wish it did. So anyway, let's move on to the next story. And before we do, ladies and gentlemen, please, I'm really not far from 100,000 subscribers. I would really appreciate it if you, dear viewer, could just like the video, share it with your friends, and just subscribe to the channel. Just help me get to 100,000. You get a nice shiny silver YouTube plaque when you hit that number. And it means the channel finally became a proper YouTube channel. That'd be great. Anyway, so let's talk about the next news story. And this actually is the news story around the potential new ambassador for South Africa, specifically Joel Pollack. Now, for those of you who have been watching this channel, you will know I was the first to call that he was the potential pick, and I was also the first to call that the ANC may potentially be sanctioned because of the individuals Trump was surrounding himself with. And would you know it, I proved right, because a few days later, obviously now the lamestream legacy media are obviously now talking about these topics, and as you'll see, I called it correctly. Anyway, Joel has recently done an interview in California. He's actually talking about what his position on South Africa is. And the first is he talked about the problems with South Africa's political climate. The first issue he raised was actually around black economic empowerment. And he says this is a huge problem for investors. He says Trump ran on anti-immigration policies. He says in terms of the United States position, this is no longer something that they want to tolerate. They don't have an appetite for it. And as a result, having any form of investment with a country that has appetite for these type of policies, he says, isn't really going to fly as Trump attempts to remake the world order. Yes, those were his exact words. He said, Trump remaking the world order. His second issue is actually around EWC. And he says, look, he appreciates that there aren't current land grabs. He says, but if you look at Zimbabwe, there were long indulgences around Zimbabwe, around some of their laws, their legislation, their political landscape. And ultimately, he says, we all saw where that went. So he says, why would you as an American go and invest in a country like South Africa where the potential to have land grabs were there? He says that overall, the entire potential undermines the government as a whole. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've had numerous people on the videos, and I've seen numerous articles where they're all going, well, but land grabs are not happening. It's not happening. And as I made the statement yesterday in the video that I made there, you can't put a law in place and then just go, but the best intentions will occur. Let me give you an example. Watch this clip from Julius.
The EFF has noted the threat by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, who has issued a threat to cut foreign aid to South Africa and impose sanctions on South Africa for adopting legislation that permits the expropriation of land without compensation and implementing policies that addresses historical race-based inequalities in our country. The statement by Donald Trump is offensive and undermines our sovereignty and is a reminder that our reliance on foreign aid and foreign direct investment surrenders us to the will of imperialists who use money to dictate the economic and policy direction of Africa. We want to make it categorically clear to the President of the USA that we are going to expropriate land without compensation and pursue legislative measures to do so, and no threat will stop us. His misinterpretation of the Expropriation Act, which is a mild and cosmetic intervention, is an assessment of a measure that is going to be pursued through the amendment of our Constitution as South Africans, and there is nothing he can do to undermine our independence. The EFF reiterates its position.
So now that you've seen that clip, are you honestly going to sit there and tell me that the Expropriation Act would never be used for harm? The idea of whole confiscation of property would never occur. Because if you do, you're not paying attention. And anyway, that's actually what Joel says his issue is. He says he understands that from a political point of view, that there are politicians who just constantly go on and on and on about redistribution. And he says, if you look at it, all South Africa attempts to do in terms of adopting their racial policies, he says, is they constantly keep referring to redressing the past. And he says, we are now at that stage where the redress of the past is now boring. He says nobody wants to hear it. He says the world as a whole is sick of seeing massive human rights violations on the basis of redressing the past. So what does this mean? Does it actually mean that AGOA will be scrapped and the trade with the United States scrapped? And lots of people have said, well, what this means is that South Africa will just gravitate towards new allies, BRICS countries. But the problem is, let's use China as an example. China isn't a net importer from us. They're a net exporter. What that basically means is that we buy lots of crap from China, cheap rubbish, and they don't really take that much from us. Whereas in the United States, their paradigm is flipped. We don't buy much from them, but we do export a lot from them. So which one enriches your country? Buying cheap rubbish from one country or exporting your cheap rubbish to someone else? Right? And so we can see where the actual trade flows are. China does take our minerals. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying to you that China doesn't buy our minerals and they don't buy anything from us, because they do. On the whole, China is an exporting nation. So obviously they're going to want to manufacture themselves and export more than they're going to want to buy and import into the country. It's not the way the country is made up. This really shouldn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. But apparently to some individuals, this is a bit like trigonometry. In any case, Joel says that at the moment, what Trump is doing is he's adopting a degree of tough love to South Africa. And the tough love is that he loves South Africa. Obviously, he's a former South African himself. But he says there needs to be a degree of shaking the box in order to get South Africa to mend its ways. So will it actually be successful, or will this all flop? Please, ladies and gentlemen, you let me know in the comment section below. So then, let's move on to the next news story, and that is apparently Cyril Ramaphosa called up Elon Musk to complain about the disinformation that he seems to be feeding through to Donald Trump. According to the article, apparently he says that he reiterated that South Africa is a constitutional democracy where it embeds the values of the rule of law, justice, fairness, and equality. Yeah. I don't think Elon's buying it, because you see, Elon's had numerous conversations with the South African government around the ownership patterns of his own company, Starlink, and the ability to actually put Starlink in South Africa whilst not being able to get a license because of BEE criteria. Elon knows full well what he's talking about. This idea that Elon's stupid and needs education is just delusional. Elon sees the rhetoric that there is on X, as do all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Go to any X, read my comment section from any form of the so-called racist nationalists, you know the type I'm talking about, name what. Go read any of those comments and you'll see exactly the vitriol that gets thrown around expropriate everything and make sure these people pay. Elon sees it too. And he sees it from the politicians, like Julius. So he knows full well what the political discord is. Saying that Cyril himself doesn't have it, for now, even though at a point he has, is a bit disingenuous. You're treating people like they're stupid but you're trying to sell them a lie. Whilst last week you were saying something different. See how this works? People are not dumb. They don't have short-term memories. So anyway, why is all this occurring? Well, News 24 actually had a theory on why this was all occurring, and apparently it's due to the G20, which obviously South Africa is due to host this year. And according to News 24, what's actually happening here is that the United States is trying to stomp its authority on South Africa so that when it gets to the G20, South Africa knows which side of the bread is buttered on, and they will side with the United States, having formed new bilateral agreements. You can let me know if you buy that comment in the comment section below. But let's actually go on to what Donald Trump says that he's doing. And let's use the case study of Canada. Now, for those of you who don't know, Donald Trump actually imposed tariffs in Canada. And everybody said that this would cripple the United States and it would all backfire. Except Donald Trump went on TV and basically said that the reason he was doing this is because there was a number of illegal immigrants crossing the border from Canada into the United States. And as part of this, there was a steady flow of fentanyl, which had caused the fentanyl crisis in the United States. And so the reason that he had imposed that tariff is because Canada wasn't policing their border. So did it have a knock-on effect on the Trump administration? Did it backfire? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is no, it didn't. Because the news out today is that Justin Trudeau met with Donald Trump and gave Donald Trump exactly what he wanted. They're investing hugely in the border. They're putting in place a fentanyl czar. They're going to make sure that there's no illegal immigration. And in response and in return for doing all of these things to fix the border, would you know it, Donald Trump said he'd lift the tariffs. The tariffs aren't going to be there anymore, but he's only giving Canada 30 days to show that they're going to make good on the promises that they made. So did it backfire? Not at all. And he says this is what people are not understanding. Now, according to Donald Trump, the reason he's doing a lot of these things is because for the longest time, the United States has given, and it's been abused. He says, he claims, the United States has been the world's charity giver. And then everybody just sits there, not as grateful individuals, but screaming and shouting at them. And for proof of that, read my comment section. But what he now says is, those days are over. He says the United States needs to make itself great again, and the only way to do that is by balancing the forms of trade that are occurring with other countries. He says they can't just keep giving others all this aid, getting nothing in return. He says now everything needs to be a two-way street. Both parties need to benefit in order for one party to get whatever that benefit might be. And you can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Is he right to do this or is he not? You see, my biggest concern with all of this is that the final news story that I would really like to discuss is Cyril Ramaphosa's response to Donald Trump. And he says he will educate Donald Trump, but he will not go to him with a begging bowl. He says obviously he has his own integrity. Yeah, that's rich coming from Cyril. Because if we go back to this whole idea that all of our troops are currently in the DRC, news is the only reason South Africa's troops on the DRC in the first place is because they're protecting Cyril's mining rights. That's why troops are there. This was an allegation made by Julius. It's an allegation made by the president of Rwanda. And actually it was an allegation made by Rob Hersoff on Chris Wyatt's show. So is it true? Are our troops being used for the personal errands of the president? To their own detriment, because our troops are dying. You see, this is what it always seems to come back with. Who cares what these individuals are doing, even if they impact the country? Your livelihoods and my livelihoods mean nothing. As long as their own special interests aren't hurt or damaged, they're not going to go to anybody with the begging bowl. Anyway, that's just my views. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.